Maybe you can still hear it, even if it's been days, weeks, or even years. The sound of his paws walking around the house, that light noise on the floor, coming from the hallway, passing through the room, stopping close to you, as if it were still there. And for a second, you even turn your face away, as if it were possible, as if he could be there again. But it isn't, and it is exactly at this moment that silence weighs the most. Because after a dog leaves, the house isn't just empty. She looks different, less alive, less full of presence. Maybe there is a place in your house that you avoid looking at. The corner where he slept, the space near the door where he waited for you, or even that spot in the room where he always lay down, just to be close to you, even without asking for anything. And the strangest thing is not just the longing, it's the feeling that something is still there, as if his absence wasn't complete, as if the void wasn't really empty. If you've ever felt this, you know exactly what I'm talking about, and maybe you never had the courage to say it out loud. But today, I need to ask you something. Did he really leave, or just stopped being seen? Because this video is about that silent doubt that many people carry, but almost no one can explain. If after a dog dies, he is left alone, or if, somehow, he's still connected to you. And I know this question may seem simple, but she changes everything. Because if he is alone, the pain is one. But if he's not, if there's any way he's still around, so everything you've felt to date can have a much greater meaning. And maybe that moment when you thought you heard something in the house, it wasn't just your imagination. Maybe that impulse to look back, or that strange feeling of presence, it came from a place that we still don't fully understand, but that a lot of people have already felt it. Throughout this video, you will understand something that few people stop to think about. You will notice signs that may have already happened to you, but went unnoticed. And mainly, you will begin to see this absence in a different way, not as an end, but as a change. Now tell me something. Have you ever had the feeling that he was still around, even after everything? If this has ever happened to you, keep it in mind, because in the next few minutes, all of this might start to make more sense than you think. And what seems like silence, it may not be silence at all. After a dog leaves, the pain doesn't just appear in memories, it shows up in the little things. In the water pot that no longer needs to be filled, when you open the door and don't see anyone waiting, in the automatic impulse to look down as if he were still going to pass between your legs. That's when many people realize that mourning a dog doesn't just live in the heart, he lives in a routine, in the house, in the body. Because before, almost everything had his presence in the middle. The sound of paws accompanying you to the kitchen, the way he followed you without making a sound, just to stay close. His way of appearing in the most ordinary moments, as if the ordinary moments were precisely the most important. And when that disappears, what remains is not just sadness. There is a kind of strangeness, as if life continued, but with something out of place, as if the house knew he was missing before you could even accept it. Maybe the place where he slept still has something of him in it. I'm not just talking about forgotten fur, the blanket, the bed, or a toy left in the corner. I'm talking about that feeling that appears when you look at that space and feel like it shouldn't be empty. As if the body understood something, but the soul refused. And this is more common than it seems. Many people think they are exaggerating, that you're being too sensitive, that I should have already moved on. But the truth is that losing a dog affects very deep parts of life, because he wasn't just part of your day, it was part of their way of existing inside the house. He occupied the silences. It broke the loneliness. He understood your mood without you having to explain anything. And maybe that's why, after he leaves, the emptiness feels wrong. Not wrong in the sense of just unfair. wrong in the sense of incomplete, as if that separation hadn't finished happening, as if some part of him was still there, mixed in the hours of the day, in the corners of the house, in the habits that you still haven't managed to abandon. A person once commented on something that touched a lot of people. She said that for weeks after the dog left, she continued to stray from the same corner of the hallway at night, because that was the place where he used to lie down. And even though she knew he wasn't there anymore, her body continued to deviate. Until one day she stopped and thought, "Why do I still do this? And the answer that came was not rational, it was emotional. Because love creates paths within us that do not disappear at the same pace as matter. Maybe you have also experienced something similar. Maybe you still talk to him without realizing it. Maybe you still think about coming home early, like you did before. Maybe there is still a moment of the day when the heart hopes to find you, even knowing the truth. And that's not weakness. This is bonding. This is a sign that what existed between you was not small. It was deep enough to continue echoing, even when the physical presence no longer responds. And here's a truth that almost no one talks about with the delicacy that this subject requires. Mourning a dog doesn't hurt just because he died. It hurts because his presence was so constant, so silent, and so faithful that absence does not enter life cleanly. She enters dragging memories. She enters opening spaces. She transforms everyday life into a memory. That's why this void seems so strange. Because deep down, it's not just a lack. It's a bond with no place to land. And when the love is still alive, but the touch is gone, the soul begins to search for meaning. It is at this point that many people begin to feel that there is something beyond longing. As if the connection hadn't been completely interrupted. As if he wasn't in that place in the house like before. But he hadn't really disappeared either. And that's exactly where the question that hurts the most arises. And at the same time, the one that can change everything the most. There is a question that almost every dog owner has felt, even without being able to say it clearly. It's not just because he went. It's also not just, why does it hurt so much? The deeper question is another. After he leaves, is he alone? This is the question that often appears in the silence. When the house gets dark, when you look at an old photo, when you remember the last day, when you think about that look he gave you just before he left, as if he wanted to say something that you couldn't understand at the time. Because losing a dog is painful in itself. But imagining that he might be alone somewhere makes this pain even heavier. It's as if the heart doesn't suffer just from absence. He also suffered from the idea of no longer being able to protect, of not being able to call anymore, of no longer being able to guarantee that he is okay. And this touches on a very human point in the bond between you. The entire time he was with you, there was a silent exchange. You took care of him with food, shelter, attention. And he took care of you with presence, loyalty, company. It was a simple but immense pact. Therefore, when he dies, part of the pain comes from precisely that. The feeling of having lost the ability to continue caring. But there is something important that almost no one explains clearly. The bond between a human and a dog is not built just by routine. It is also built by emotional repetition. For the days spent together, for shared habits, for the security they gave each other, by the way he recognized your footsteps before you even opened the door, the way he followed you around the house, not because he needed something, but because being close was enough. All of this leaves deep marks on the brain, body, and memory. Science already shows, in a simple way, that true emotional bonds change our emotional state, our behavior, and even the way we perceive presence and absence. When this bond is very strong, it does not disappear at the moment of loss. It continues to act within us because it was real, constant, and lived every day. But there is a part of this experience that goes beyond practical explanation. Because it's not just memory. If it were just memory, it wouldn't hurt so vividly. If it were just custom, it wouldn't seem so present. If it was just nostalgia, I wouldn't mess with this strange feeling of continuity. And that's why so many people experience conflict inside. On the one hand, the mind tries to accept that it is over. On the other, the heart feels that it is not completely finished, as if some part of the story was still in motion, as if love didn't combine with total disappearance. And perhaps this is exactly where most people remain silent, because you're afraid of looking weak, afraid of appearing fanciful. He's afraid to admit that, deep down, he still feels like a dog in some way. Pay attention to that. Not everything that remains can be seen. In life, the deepest things almost never make a sound. You don't see the link. You don't see the longing. You don't see the memory coming suddenly when you pass a corner of the house. But all this exists. And when the relationship with a dog was true, it doesn't end like someone turning off a light. She changes shape. First, continue in the broken routine. Then, it continues with the memories that return on their own. And then it starts to continue in a way that is more difficult to explain. On a premonition, in a sudden peace, remember him. In a feeling of closeness that appears without warning. It is at this point that the question stops being just painful and begins to open space for another possibility. Maybe he's not alone. Maybe the way we think about leaving is too limited for such a big bond. Maybe death interrupts the physical presence, but it cannot immediately break everything that was built with love, coexistence, and silent surrender. Because a dog doesn't enter someone's life as a detail. He gets into the rhythm of the house, in the way of waking up, on the way home, on bad days, on ordinary days, on the days when no one else noticed, but he did. And ties like this don't seem to have been made to end coldly. That's why this question weighs so much. Not because she only talks about death, but because she talks about continuity, about the chance of love remaining somehow, even when the eyes can no longer reach it. And when this possibility starts to make sense, another image appears along with it. That perhaps, after the match, he was not thrown into the void. Maybe there is a way. Maybe there is support. Perhaps there is a way for him to remain close to what he recognized most in the world. You. And this is precisely where everything starts to change. Because from that point on, the question stops being just, where is he? And becomes, in what form does it still remain? There is an idea that scares a lot of people. The idea that when a dog dies, it just disappears. As if everything he was, his presence, his affection, his look, his way of recognizing you, was erased all at once. But when we look more closely at the type of bond that exists between a human and a dog, this idea starts to not make so much sense. Because he didn't just live in the physical space of the house. He lived in his routine, on your schedule, in your movements, in the way you went through the days. So when he leaves, it's not just the body that leaves. It's as if an entire presence needed to find another way to exist. And this is exactly where the conflict begins within many people. Because at the same time that logic says, it's over, something inside you continues to feel continuity. As if he hadn't simply ceased to be. As if he had changed places, or in shape. One person said something that left many people silent. She said that a few days after the dog left, she began to notice a strange habit. Always at the same time of night, when she sat on the couch, exactly as she had done before, she would feel a slight pressure on the side of her leg. Nothing visible, nothing that could be easily explained. But it was always in the same place where he used to lie down. At first, she ignored it. He thought it was an impression. Tiredness, accumulated longing. But the repetition started to get annoying. Because it wasn't random. It was too specific. And one day, instead of pushing the feeling away, she did something different. She just stood there, without moving, without trying to explain. And for the first time since he left, she felt something other than pain. It was familiarity. as if that presence, even without form, still recognized the usual path. This is not an isolated case. Many people report small experiences that they don't know exactly how to classify. They are not visions, it's not intense stuff. These are details, rapid sensations, subtle changes in the environment, like a faint sound in the house when everything is silent, like the impression that someone has passed through a place where no one is, like that impulse to look at the spot where he used to be, for no apparent reason. And the most curious thing is that these experiences almost always happen linked to the old routine, as if something still followed the same paths, as if the bond created during life had not been abruptly interrupted, but just transformed. This raises a possibility that, although simple, completely changes the way we see everything. And if they don't disappear, but do they continue in a way that we haven't yet fully learned to understand? Because when you think about it, his presence was never just physical. She was emotional. It was energetic. It was made of repetition, recognition, constant coexistence. And perhaps that's exactly why, after the match, this presence doesn't disappear immediately. It loses its visible form, but it can continue to manifest itself in more subtle ways, less obvious, quieter, and it doesn't require you to believe in anything extreme. It just requires you to honestly observe what you have already felt. That time when the house seemed less empty for a few seconds. That moment when longing was accompanied by a strangely peaceful feeling. That impression that, for an instant, he was there, even without being there. Now think with me. If the bond you had was based on constant presence, coming soon age, in daily recognition, does it make sense that all of this would just disappear without leaving any kind of trace? Or does it make more sense for there to be a period, a transition, where that connection still remains active in some way? This is the part that bothers a lot of people, because if that's true, so he is not lost, you are not alone, and much less distant from what he knew best. Perhaps he is still trying to understand this new state. Maybe he's still close to what was part of his world. Maybe it's still close to you. And when this possibility begins to be taken seriously, the feeling changes, the pain continues, the longing continues. But something new appears in the midst of all this, a different question, less heavy, more open, and it is precisely this doubt that prepares the way for something even deeper. Because if he continues, so the question is no longer whether it exists. The question now is, what is his real place after he left? But now I want you to forget for a moment everything you've heard your whole life about the end. Forget the cold idea that death erases. Forget the image of total separation. Because when it comes to a bond as deep as that between a human and his dog, perhaps the truth is much less about breakup and much more about continuity. And this is the revelation that changes everything. Your dog is not alone after he dies because the love that connected you does not die at the same moment as the body. This changes the pain, because the question is no longer, was he abandoned somewhere invisible? And it becomes, in what ways is this bond still alive now? Think about what existed between you. He knew how to recognize your mood by the way you entered the house. I knew when you were sad before you said anything. I knew to wait at the door. He knew how to follow you from one room to another just to stay within your field of presence. This wasn't just habit, it was harmony. It was a type of connection built in everyday life, in small things, but repeated with so much truth that they became the language of the soul. And when a connection like this is real, it doesn't seem designed to end in absolute silence. She seems made to cross. Maybe not in the way the eyes want. Maybe not in the way that longing demands. But somehow, she gets through. So pay attention to this, because this part can touch exactly what you are experiencing. Perhaps the biggest mistake is to imagine that, after death, the dog enters a state of loneliness just like humans imagine. But the dog never lived love as a theory. He lived as a presence, as recognition, as delivery. His world was simple but profound. You, the house, the routine, the sound of your voice, the smell of your arrival, the place where he felt safe. If his existence was marked by this bond, it makes sense to think that his transition is also guided by this same bond, not like prison, but as direction, not as suffered attachment, but as a known path. This is why so many people deep down feel that their dog is not gone. He feels that he was welcomed by something that is not foreign to the love that lived here, as if the connection built between you served as a bridge, as if he wasn't wandering alone, as if he was being driven by the same connection that made him part of your life. And here's the phrase you might need to remember today. Those who were truly loved don't leave in the dark. Keep that. Because this phrase doesn't just talk about comfort. She talks about meaning. A dog that has been loved, cared for, called by name, waited for, hugged, remembered, does not go through existence like someone who falls into the void. He crosses marked by bond, marked by belonging, marked by a relationship that gave him reference, security, and emotional identity. That's why death can change the form of presence, but he cannot transform true love into abandonment. And perhaps that is the hardest and most beautiful part to accept at the same time. You can no longer take care of it with your hands, but that doesn't mean he was left without support. You can no longer see him lying in his usual place, but that doesn't mean he's lost. You don't hear paws around the house in the same way anymore, but that doesn't mean the connection is over. It just means that it has gone out of sight. And when something leaves the visible, human pain usually calls it absence. However, in very deep bonds, absence is not always the most complete name. Sometimes the more honest name is transformation. Transformation of presence. Contact transformation. Transformation of the way love continues to reach you. That's why some memories warm instead of just hurt. That's why, on certain days, thinking about him brings a peace that seems to come from outside of logic. That's why some people feel, in the midst of grief, that there is something holding their heart without being able to explain how. Dustra, that the revelation is not just that it continues. The revelation is that it remains connected. And when you understand this, everything changes. Change the way you remember. Change the way you suffer. It even changes the way we interpret that silence in the house. Because maybe silence is not complete absence. Maybe it's just the new way of a presence that no longer needs to make noise to exist. And if this is true, then there is an even deeper consequence. Maybe your dog isn't just supported. Maybe he still finds subtle ways to touch your world. And that's exactly where the signs that almost no one notices begin. After this idea starts to make sense, something changes inside us. We stop looking only at the lack and start paying attention to what still touches our hearts without warning. Because most of the time, if there is any form of presence after the match, it doesn't arrive in a big way. It arrives in everyday life, in the simplest way, in the quietest way. The way it matches almost everything a dog has always been in someone's life, a constant, discreet, and faithful companion. That's why so many people only realize it later, because you expect something extraordinary, but the signs almost always come in ordinary things. A moment when you pass a room and feel a sudden peace, in the unexpected desire to smile when remembering precisely one of his habits, in the feeling of comfort that appears in the middle of a heavy day, as if for a few seconds the heart had been visited by something familiar. Sometimes the signal doesn't come as sound, not even as an image. It comes as emotional certainty, a brief but very clear certainty, as if for a moment the longing stopped hurting and began to embrace. And this usually happens in very simple scenes. When you open the door to your house and remember the way he was waiting for you, when you accidentally look at the corner where he slept, when you hear a noise similar to that of paws on the floor and your chest tightens. But soon after, instead of collapsing, you feel calm, as if that memory hadn't come to hurt. I had come to play. One person said that months after the dog left, they had a particularly difficult day. She came home crying, dropped her things on the table, and sat on the living room floor, exactly where he used to lie next to her. And there, in the midst of that tiredness, came a very specific memory, the way he slowly leaned his head against her leg when he realized she wasn't well. At the same time, the crying changed. The pain continued, but it was no longer a pain of abandonment. It was an accompanied pain, as if the memory had arrived with a presence inside, as if love had found a way to make itself noticed again. That's what almost no one realizes. Not every sign serves to prove something. Many serve to console, to remember, to keep what was built alive, because such a strong bond rarely disappears without leaving echoes. And the deepest echoes are not the ones that scare. They are the ones who welcome. They are the ones that appear in everyday life, where your relationship has always truly existed. In the hallway of the house, at the entrance door, in the silence of the night. In that space where he slept and which, for some reason, still seems full of meaning. Maybe you've already experienced something like this and kept it to yourself. Maybe I felt embarrassed to tell you. But the truth is that many people go through these small experiences and only remain silent because they think no one would understand. That's why I want to tell you something clearly. When the bond was real, it's natural for it to continue leaving sensitive marks on your daily life. Not everything needs to be explained at the same time to be true in what it provokes within you. And perhaps the most beautiful thing about these signs is this: they almost never push you away from life. They get closer. They help you breathe. They help you remember with less guilt. They help you understand that true love doesn't end when it stops being visible. If you have ever felt that your dog visited you in the form of peace, a strong memory, or a subtle presence, write it in the comments. Because when someone has the courage to tell you, someone else understands that they are not alone. And sometimes that's how grief starts to change shape, when pain stops being just silence and also becomes recognition. Because in the end, maybe the signs aren't just there to show that he's still attached to you. Maybe they also exist to prepare your heart for the most beautiful part of all. Perhaps what hurts most is not just the lack. Be it the feeling that such a beautiful story couldn't end like that. No explanation, no response, without a final understanding capable of calming the heart. Because when a dog leaves, not just one animal leaves. A presence leaves that knew your routine, your tone of voice, your silences, your good days, and even those days when no one noticed anything. But he noticed. And maybe that's why, deep down, so many people feel like the story isn't really over. That there is still something between the heaven of longing and the life that continues. Something that hasn't gone away. Something that still calls. And maybe now you can look at the first memory of that video in a different way. The sound of paws around the house. That simple sound. Every day. Almost small. But it carried one of the greatest proofs of love that anyone can receive. The certainty of not being alone. At the time, you might not even have realized how much that sound followed you. He came from the hallway, the kitchen, the living room. Sometimes I followed you. Sometimes I waited for you. Sometimes he just stood nearby, as if saying without words, "I'm here." And that is precisely what takes on a new meaning now. Because maybe his love isn't over. Maybe he just doesn't need to make noise anymore to continue existing. Maybe the reunion isn't just a distant promise. Perhaps it has already started in the only way such a true bond could continue. Inside. In the memory that does not weaken. In the peace that sometimes comes without warning. In the feeling of presence that visits the heart when everything seemed too silent. In the love that still moves inside the house, even when the eyes no longer find anyone in the usual place. It doesn't erase the pain. It doesn't reduce the lack. Don't pretend that losing doesn't hurt. But one essential thing changes. The idea of separation changes. Because when there is real love, the distance can never be complete. The body says goodbye. The routine changes. The ringing ends. But the bond finds another way to remain. And perhaps this is the truth that surprises the most. Your dog is not alone. And in some deep, invisible way, neither are you. Because what you built together wasn't just company. It was soul recognition. It was belonging. It was a form of love so pure, so constant, that it would be too small to call it chance. Maybe that's why certain misses bring tears, but others bring a calm that feels like a visitor. Maybe that's why some memories don't come to hurt. Come to remember that what was lived with truth continues to leave light after leaving. And before closing, I want to leave you with a question from the most sincere point of my heart. What if the bond you had with him was never meant to fit into a single lifetime? Think about it. Because maybe the empty plate, the corner where he slept, the door where he waited for you, and even the silence in the house are not just signs of loss. Perhaps they are marks of a presence so strong that not even death could completely erase it. If you believe your dog's love still lives on in some form, write in the comments, "Our bond continues." Sometimes a sentence like this isn't just a comment. It's a statement. It's a tribute. It's the way of saying, in the face of absence, that certain bonds don't end. They just change shape. And if one day, in the middle of a silent afternoon, you feel that strange impression again that he passed by, maybe don't try to move away so quickly, because it could be that the sound of the pause has left the house, but not the bond. And when a love like this remains, the reunion is no longer just hope. It becomes an echo.